whereby this success has not been reflected yet. So therefore, the CGE conducted a research study to understand why the sector is failing to comply with the existing pieces of legislation and policies that seek to promote gender mainstreaming in South Africa. The objectives of this study was to assess the extent of gender mainstreaming by examining programs and plans of provincial houses of traditional leaders. And in this particular year, we also looked at the National House of Traditional Leaders. And this was done in line with the provisions of the existing pieces of legislation that seek to promote gender equality in the workplace. The study also interrogated the roles played by women and men in the operations of the houses. And lastly, we also gauged the level of gender representation within the structures of provincial houses of traditional leaders, as well as the National House. I will just briefly touch on our mandate. As we may all know, we are an independent statutory body created under Chapter 9 of the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa, which is Act number 108 of 1996. And under Section 187 of the Constitution, the CGE has a mandate to promote respect for and the protection, development, and attainment of gender equality. And the vision of the CGE is that of a society that is free from gender oppression and all forms of inequality. Also with our mandate, we monitor and evaluate legislation, policies and practices of the state, statutory bodies and private businesses, as well as indigenous and customary laws and practices. We research and make recommendations to Parliament. We receive and investigate complaints of gender discrimination, and we also conduct public awareness and education on gender equality. And it is from this premise that the study was conducted, as our mandate gives us these powers. In terms of the methodology or research approach that we adopted, I would like to emphasize that this study was carried out in the 2018 and 2019 financial year. But prior to that, the study had already started in 2017 and 2018, where we focused on 4 provincial houses of traditional leaders. However, today's presentation focuses on ones that were covered in the 2018-19 financial year. And in that study of 2018 and 2019, the study covered 3 provincial houses of traditional leaders, and these were Limpopo, the Northern Cape, Free State, and we also in this year focus on the National House of Traditional Leaders. In 2017-2018, we had started off with the Northern Cape, KwaZulu-Natal, pardon me, members. We had started with the Northwest, Mpumalanga, KwaZulu-Natal, and the Eastern Cape. So these were the 4 that were covered in 2017. Prior to the commencement of the field work and data collection, the research team embarked on trips to the 4 houses of traditional leaders, and the mandate or our priority for these trips was to familiarize ourselves with the systems and structures and to appreciate the dynamic nature and uniqueness of each house, because we had noticed that the houses were different, especially in terms of their composition. I will now take us through the overview of key findings of the study. Broadly, the findings of the study point to challenges in a number of key areas relating to these houses of traditional leaders as institutions. And what we found was that there was a lack of effective coordination of the work of the houses of traditional leaders, particularly of institutional and structural consistency or uniformity between the national and provincial houses, which then led to inconsistencies in terms of common understanding and discharging of the functions and responsibilities of these institutions. So what we found was that there seemed to be a lack of relationship between the national house and provincial houses, and therefore there was a disjuncture in terms of the discharging of functions and responsibilities. We also found that there were low levels of representation and of participation of female traditional leaders as compared to their male counterparts. And we also noted the absence of clearly written internal policies and or organizational rules and regulation on gender equality, women's rights, and empowerment. So I'll make an example here. What we noted was that although legislation, for example, would give provision for a quota for women's representation in the houses, that's where it would normally end, where gender is concerned, and the houses would not therefore also include in their own internal policies measures to ensure that there is gender mainstreaming. There was a lack of adequate institutional support programs, and we're speaking here of beyond just financial and administrative support from the relevant government departments, which are the provincial departments for cooperative governance and traditional affairs, as well as the National Department for Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs with regards to the National House, to strengthen and build capacity for the houses of traditional leaders and their members to discharge their responsibilities effectively and to fulfill their constitutional mandate. As we may know, that these departments have the responsibility to support these houses. However, we found that that support was inadequate in order for these houses to run effectively. We also noted failure to observe, respect, and strengthen the institutional autonomy of the houses of traditional leaders from these government departments for cooperative governance and traditional affairs. So what we noted was that instead of providing support, those that we interviewed, especially members of these traditional houses, would say that the departments were meddling or taking over the responsibility to run the houses. As I continue, we also noted from the findings that there was a lack of gender mainstreaming and women's empowerment programs accompanied by a limited understanding of and attention to gender mainstreaming and women's empowerment issues of concern. There was also an institutional weakness across the House of Traditional Leaders, particularly weak and ineffective or non-functioning internal committee systems, which affected the program planning, execution, and impact. So what we had noted was that the various houses had internal committees, and these committees were put in place to ensure that houses run effectively and therefore have programs that would impact their communities. However, we found that in fact, the data was fragmented in a sense that in other provinces, there seemed to be work being done in partnership most of the time. For example, the National House would have key partnerships as well as the Free State. But when you go to other provinces, you'd find that nothing was being done by these committees. Hence, we say there was that kind of institutional weakness. The study found that the National House had not been effective in discharging its responsibility and obligation to ensure that there's uniformity and effective cooperation between itself and provincial houses. And as a result, a number of discrepancies in the application of relevant legislation were uncovered. And I will give an example here of the Traditional Leadership Framework Act of 2009, which is clear that provincial legislations must provide for mechanisms and procedures to ensure that a sufficient number of women are represented in the provincial houses and to ensure that women are elected as representatives of provincial houses to the national house. But yet what we found was that some provinces had deviated in the application of this provision without intervention from the national house. And an example here would be where the provincial houses needed to appoint or rather elect 3 members who would be a delegation that would represent that house in the National House to form its membership. We found that while other houses would ensure that at least one of the 3 of the delegation are women, other houses would not comply, even though there was a sufficient number of women to form that delegation. And we saw that there was no intervention from the National House. That membership of purely men would be accepted by the National House. The findings of this study have also revealed that there were gaps in the provisions of legislation that seek to address issues of gender equality. For example, in the cases of provincial houses where legislation makes provision for the 30% quota for women's representation in their memberships. Not much was done in terms of realizing this provision, especially in key decision-making structures and or amongst office bearer positions. And the key challenge here was that where this quota is applied, there would be instances whereby, however, when we look at decision-making structures such as the executive committee, you'd find gender imbalances there. And also in the position of chairperson and deputy chairperson of the House, we'd find that sometimes both positions would be occupied by men, and these are full-time positions. So we found that there were those discrepancies in this regard. The issue of the independence of the houses was a common problem across the board. Our analysis revealed that while legislation clearly mandates the provincial and national departments of cooperative governance and traditional affairs to provide support to these houses, the provincial and national departments appeared instead to have become dominant over the operational, administrative, and funding of these houses. So the houses felt that they could not operate on their own outside of the interference of these government departments. And we say this because it would have been expected that these houses, as constitutionally autonomous structures, they would be responsible for drafting their own strategic and operational plans, as well as managing their own financial or budgetary and other resources in order to discharge their responsibilities and to fulfill their constitutional mandates. These are the recommendations that emanated from the study. The findings in this study indicated a lack of coordination and uniformity between the National House of Traditional Leaders and the provincial houses of traditional leaders in terms of compliance with the provisions of the Constitution, national legislation, internal rules and orders, as well as practices relating to gender equality and women's participation in the houses. It was therefore recommended that the National House of Traditional Leaders, in collaboration with national and provincial government, departments of cooperative governance and traditional affairs, that they must develop intervention programs or strategies and effective mechanisms and procedures to educate and raise awareness and knowledge of the provisions of the Constitution and relevant national legislation regarding gender transformation and women's empowerment in traditional leadership structures. And we also said that this process should be accompanied by a thorough review of all internal house rules and orders, including internal procedures and practices relating to the promotion of gender equality, women's representation, and participation in the operations of the houses of traditional leaders. Secondly, it was recommended that the National Department of Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs, working closely with the National House of Traditional Leaders, that they may develop clear and effective systems to ensure effectiveness and accountability and oversight over the work of provincial houses of traditional leaders, and to build capacity of the National House of Traditional Leaders in order to enforce accountability. because as I had said, there seemed to be no cooperation or relationship between the national house and the provincial houses. Therefore, there was no accountability between the two structures, if I may put it that way. This should be accompanied by a national program to review the effectiveness of current committee systems of the houses of traditional leaders, and when necessary, to provide support and to build the institutional capacity of these committees in order for them to discharge their functions and responsibilities. Thirdly, it was recommended that the National House of Traditional Leaders utilize its legislative powers to enforce gender transformation in processes of appointing traditional leaders and to ensure that there is a fulfillment of the current 30% legislated quota for women's representation in the houses of traditional leaders. And that this is always observed and upheld, including the application of this quota in the appointment and representation of women in key decision-making structures of the houses. Fourthly, the CGE recommended that provincial premiers and the Minister for Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs carry out a review of the 30% legislative quota requirement for women's representation in the National House and provincial houses of traditional leaders to ensure that it aligns with national, regional, and global gender instruments and frameworks for gender equality and women's representation. Furthermore, we had noted that there was a legislative loophole that was created by current legal provisions that allows for provincial premiers and ministers to lower women's representation thresholds in cases whereby there's an insufficient number of women. And we recommend that this must also be reviewed and possibly be removed, because it created leeway for houses to get away with not meeting the threshold. So whereby women are less than that required threshold, the reason would be that, but we can lower the threshold if there aren't enough women. So we see it as not progressive. In addition, the provincial acts governing the affairs of the provincial houses of traditional leaders should also be reviewed and amended in this regard, with the internal rules of orders governing the operations of the houses and traditional leaders also reviewed and revised to be consistent or to be aligned with these amendments. Fifthly, it was recommended that the role of the national and provincial government departments of cooperative governance and traditional affairs in supporting the houses of traditional leaders be reviewed in order to minimize the encroachment that undermines the autonomy of the houses of traditional leaders as independent and constitutional bodies, I beg your pardon. In addition, the government should ensure that these provisions of support and capacity building of these institutions also includes the provision of necessary skills and awareness raising around gender equality and gender mainstreaming policy and legislative frameworks. And in terms of raising awareness around gender equality and gender mainstreaming policy and legislative frameworks, the CGE recommended that the National House of Traditional Leaders, that it may work closely with key institutions such as the CGE in developing clear national skills development and awareness programs for traditional leadership structures at both national and provincial levels, including royal houses, which are responsible for appointing senior traditional leaders, and with emphasis on the need to comply with gender transformation regulatory frameworks around processes for the appointment of traditional leaders in South Africa, as well as the representation and participation of women traditional leadership structures at local, provincial, and national levels. That was my presentation, Chairperson. Thank you for the attention of all.
Through you, Chair, thank you very much, Ms. Naledi. Through you, Chair, we would request Ms. Matthews, Mamello Matthews, to come in and present a report on public investigative hearings. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Chairperson. Thank you, Naledi. Ms. Matthews can proceed.
Thank you, Chairperson. I'm just trying to share my screen, please. Okay, perfect. Everyone can see that, I hope?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. So I will be presenting on the CGE's gender transformation hearings with regards to institutions of higher learning and gender-based violence at these higher learning between the financial year of 2018 and 2019. Further to that, I will also briefly be presenting on the follow-up hearings that took place in respect of the recommendations that had been made by the Commission to these institutions, and the follow-up hearings was thus for the purpose of investigating as to whether those recommendations had been complied with. I just want the panel to note that you will not see a presentation, an actual presentation on the follow-up hearings, so I will speak to it as I cover each point. So I'm going to start off by discussing briefly what the overview should look like, or what you can expect as the audience. Firstly, I'm not going to discuss the CGE's mandate because that's been covered. However, I will discuss the legal framework that speaks to this investigation or these hearings, as well as the actual transformation hearings and what the purpose of these hearings were. And then I will discuss the overall findings. As I discuss the overall findings, I will then switch over to the follow-up hearings in respect of whether these findings were complied with, as I mentioned previously. And then briefly discuss the interventions by the CGE. So in respect of the legal framework, before I move on to the next slide, I just want to briefly run through the legal framework, or the acts as well as conventions, both regionally and internationally, which speaks to the purpose of these hearings, or rather, which govern these hearings and the findings. So I'll start with our constitution, the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa. This, in respect of legislation, the applicable sections would be Section 7, Section 9, and Section 23 of the Constitution, as well as Section 29. Section 7 of the Constitution, as we all know, states that the Bill of Rights is a cornerstone of democracy in South Africa. Thus, any policy, any legislation, any practice that, I beg your pardon, that is done within South Africa has to meet the muster of the Constitution. Otherwise, practices or policies may be found to be unconstitutional. Then we have Section 9 of the Constitution, which speaks to everyone's right to equality before the law and to have equal protection and benefit of the law. Then we have Section 23, which provides that everyone has the right to fair labor practices. And Section 29 that provides that everyone has the right to education. So the second, the first convention would be the second piece of legislation is the Commission for Gender Equality Act, which the Commission obviously relies on in all respects of the work that it does. I'll touch briefly on that as we go on. Promotion for Equality and Prevention of Unfair Discrimination Act, PAPUDA as we all know it, also a very important piece of legislation when it comes to the work that we do. In respect of these particular hearings, we look also, or we rely as well on the Employment Equity Act, and that will become clear as I go on in the presentation. Labor Relations Act, Basic Conditions of Employment Act, then we have the Broad-Based Economic Empowerment Act, BBEE Act, and then the Higher Education Amendment Act, also relevant in respect to the fact that we are speaking about higher institutions. Regional instruments and international instruments, we have the AU Agenda, which is the African Agenda 2063, as well as the African Charter on the Rights and Welfare of the Child, African Charter on Human and People's Rights, protocols to the African Charter on Human and People's Rights of Women in Africa, 2002, the African Youth Charter, South African Development Community, so SADC protocols on education and training. There's a whole host of conventions. So I'll just move on to the next slide so you can see. So the first one being of importance to us as the commission, as the CGEs, the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. And we rely specifically on Article 1 of CEDAW when undertaking any of our legal undertakings, such as our employment equity hearings, and then, for example, the specific hearing that we had. So the purpose of the present convention is that the term discrimination against women shall mean any distinction or exclusion or restriction. So when we're referring to, similarly, as in the Constitution, when we're referring to discrimination, or in this instance, discrimination against women, we are looking at what the concept, for example, what does it mean? So is there a distinction? Has there been a particular distinction between a woman and a man? And has that distinction resulted in exclusion or restriction? So that's how that is implemented or feeds into our assessments or analysis that we make. I'm not going to go through each one for the sake of time, because there are literally 20. So I'm just going to move on frameworks within our Constitution that are important to us in this regard as well. So freedom and security of the person, Section 12, freedom of movement, Section 21, and access to healthcare, Section 27. These all speak to these hearings, and you'll see why. Right, let's start with the actual presentation on the hearings. Okay, I'm going to please request that if I speak too fast, that I be told to slow down, because I have a tendency of running faster through things, and it can make the presentation somewhat unpleasant. So I'm going to start with the transformation hearings as the slide that's before you. The CGE conducted these hearings in the financial year 2018-2019, as I mentioned earlier, and four institutions, or rather 4 universities, were invited to participate. And when I say invited, I mean they were subpoenaed to come before the commission. Questionnaires were dispatched to these institutions asking various questions, which fed the report that was later produced. So the 4 universities that came before the commission was the University of Zululand, Nelson Mandela University, Sol Plaatje University, Mpumalanga University, and outside of that, and the Department of Higher Education and Training also subpoenaed to appear before the commission. At these transformation hearings, and why they happened was because the CGE became concerned, or was rather concerned, with the lack of proper understanding of gender dynamics in the workplace, as well as this lack of understanding being accompanied by or resulted in a slow pace of transformation. The CGE found that females and persons with disabilities were often underrepresented at top, senior, and middle management of various entities as well, including these entities that were before the commission. We found that students with disabilities all their needs had not been catered for. For example, there were no sign language interpreters available to students who were deaf, and an increasing number of gender-based violence cases and sexual harassment cases were surfacing, which indicated that the safety of staff and students around and outside their respective campuses was almost non-existent. Okay. So in respect of the low-level compliance, the relevant labor legislation aimed at transformation was important, more especially the Employment Equity Act, the Basic Conditions of Employment, Promotion of Equity, well, PAPUDA, as I spoke about earlier, and also common law development. So the CGE needed to make an assessment or an analysis from the information provided, as well as we needed to make an analysis in respect of these legislation, in respect of what it is that we knew as a CGE was happening outside. When I say outside, I'm referring to these institutions, versus what was actually happening within these structures when it comes to transformation and creating safe environments for staff and students. And with those facts and these pieces of legislation, we were then able to make an assessment as to whether these entities were meeting the standard that was required of them as an entity. Okay. Just move on to the next one. So the CGE's decision to place special focus on institutions of higher learning was precipitated by disturbing media reports. Like I mentioned earlier, these media reports would speak to what was happening in terms of what was happening on the outside, and why an intervention, or at least an analysis or an investigation into these institutions was necessary. So these included media reports for sex for marks scandals. That's obviously a massive concern to any citizen living in the country. When you see media reports of this nature, allegations of sexual harassment at institutions of higher learning, slow transformation around lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and intersex students or staff members. So in other words, LGBTIQ issues needed to be addressed. The placement of women and persons with disabilities in senior management, as mentioned earlier, we found that there was a massive underrepresentation in those specific spheres. The increase of number of gender-based violence cases at these institutions. So if there's an increase, it's worrisome, because your next question is, why is it increasing? What is the institution doing? So the CGE needed to investigate as to whether they were doing something, and if they were they doing enough? So the purpose of the primary objectives of the hearings were to assess the impact of the employment equity legislation and to hold these institutions of higher learning accountable for non-compliance, as well as to probe into the then current internal policies. So what were the policies looking like? What were they speaking to? Are these policies contributing to the non-compliance, or are they just non-compliant to really good policies that they may or may not hold? So what else? To probe current internal policies, systems, programs, and relevant strategies to put in place by selected institutions to ensure effective gender transformation, including challenges faced in achieving the transformation goals. Furthermore, the hearings also used a platform to bring to light the discrimination and risks experienced by not only by women, but people with disabilities, and as well as the LGBTIQ plus community, as we are aware that this community does as well face a high level of murder and assault towards individuals within the community. So we also needed to know, is the university, or are these universities or institutions doing something to protect those communities within the university campuses? Okay, so the first first university we are going to address is that of the University of Zululand. I'm going to give you a brief background as to what this institution is or who they are. The University of Zululand is located within, I should have done that, it's going to be a hard word for me to read. So they are within, I'm going to try, within the Hlatuze local municipality. I'm sorry if I pronounced that incredibly incorrectly. Thank you very much. I'm going to practice with my pronunciation in the financial year 2018-2019, as I mentioned earlier. And the steps that we as the Commission took following the hearings held in 2018-2019 was to make certain findings and recommendations, which the university had to comply with. So I'm going to start with what you're seeing on the screen first. The Commission found that the University of Zululand did not have mechanisms to drive gender transformation, especially at the top two outcomes, prior to the appointment of the transformation manager. So recruitment of female candidates at these top tiers is required, and therefore mechanisms had to be put in place to ensure that employment equity targets had been reached by 2020. So once the university had made their presentation at the hearing to the Commission then recommended that the University of Zululand should appoint sign language practitioners to assist deaf students with interpretation during lectures. That was to be done with immediate effect. The Commission then recommended that the university should urgently adopt a few policies, which meant that those policies weren't there. So a gender policy did not exist. That needed to be adopted by the end of the 2019-22 financial year, or at least by the 2019-2020 financial year. Gender-based violence policy, sexual harassment policy. Furthermore, it was recommended that gender transformation should be included as a key performance indicator in the contracts of two executives who were charged with gender transformation, which is shocking that you would have two executives holding a particular position, but the key element of their position is not within their KPIs. So it's obvious that there was a gender transformation plan, but the role, however, the main role was not a KPI that needed to be addressed. Since the University of Zululand could not provide disaggregated data on PWDs, it was recommended by the Commission that it must make effective use of the recruitment policy to include persons with disabilities in the workforce. And then the conclusion was that the CGE would monitor whether these recommendations had been implemented and if they had been done well. So at the follow-up hearings, an assessment had to be done as to whether this was the case, whether the recommendations had been applied. So let's start with the first one. So the Commission found that the UniZulu did not have mechanisms to drive gender transformation, as I mentioned, and that they were required to implement mechanisms to ensure that the employment equity target was reached by 2020. The Commission then found that a policy and procedures on talent management was adopted by the Council in June 2019. The policy targets women and persons with disabilities for training programs aimed at developing leadership readiness. 13 women had already been enrolled for the management program or the management development program in 2019, which implied that a pool of women that were already in the university's employ could qualify for top management positions. This was what was reported back to us at the follow-up hearings. Just as a reminder, the next recommendation was that UniZulu should adopt a sign language practitioners with immediate effect. Sign language is included in the university's language policy. A meeting was held with a language practitioner from a sister university in the province to understand how they could deal with the issue. However, the university found that the sign language is not universal. It differs from one discipline to another, thus creating a challenge in finding resources for sign language interpreters for each discipline. So at that time, in the interim, the university was exploring visual subtitles for its deaf students. I'm just having a look. So there's 6 in total. The commission recommended that the university should urgently adopt the policies that I mentioned earlier, such as the gender policy, the gender-based violence policy, and the sexual harassment policy. What was reported at the follow-up hearings was that policies on sexual harassment and gender GBV were adopted by the council then in June of 2019, and it addressed both students and staff's needs. So awareness workshops had been held with groups of students for further training as planned for all role players and stakeholders. A policy on anti-discrimination aimed at protecting staff and students from discrimination and bullying was also adopted. Gender policy aimed at mainstreaming gender into all policies and programs of the university had been drafted. At the time it was going to be evaluated. We would need to find out if that has thus changed to date. The commission recommended that gender transformation should be included as a key performance indicator, as I mentioned earlier. UniZulu did not provide an update regarding that particular recommendation. The commission then sent a follow-up communication to which no response was received. However, the university dealt with the recommendation during the follow-up hearing that was held in 2019-2020 financial year. The next recommendation that was addressed, since UniZulu could not provide disaggregated data on persons with disabilities, it was recommended by the commission that it must take effective use of the recruitment policy to include PWDs in the workforce. An employment equity policy has recently been reviewed and adopted by the council. Then the reviewed policies specifically address the need for equality in disability. All recruitment processes would in future and from then be emphasized when it came to the university's positions as an employer, and encouraged women and persons with disabilities to apply. Okay, the last recommendation under this particular institution, the commission undertook to investigate allegations that pregnant students were expelled from campus residence when in their last 3 months of pregnancy. Recommendation, or I don't want to say a recommendation, but in respect to that particular point, the UniZulu did not provide an update regarding that recommendation. However, it provided a separate reason or response regarding the allegation aimed at ending discrimination. Complainants confirmed that the university provided a communication to its staff and students ending the alleged discrimination. Right. So what does this mean overall? I just want to see that I'm not missing. Is that it? What's going on? Okay. So what does everything that I've just said mean overall? So the commission found that the university had not sufficiently complied with the commission's previous recommendations and recommended the following actions to be taken. So it recommended that UniZulu must share its plans for the development of the following policies with the commission by the end of March 2020. flexi-time policy, maternity leave policy, paternity leave policy, transition and transgender health policy. The Commission recommended that the university should reflect and work on the previous recommendations of the 2018-2019 report, and that the Commission will, in this instance, continue to monitor the implementation of the recommendations until it is satisfied of the full implementation of the recommendations. So although from this presentation, it may seem that the university did well because it met the recommendations that we, or rather, it appeared to have met because it reported on it. It did not report on policies such as flexi-time policy, maternity leave policy, or when reporting it was inadequate, and therefore they needed to go back to the drawing board and address those. Okay, our next for discussion or presentation. What is going on here? There we go. Is the Nelson Mandela University. Just get. So Nelson Mandela University appeared before the Commission during, again, 2018-2019 in relation to transformation hearings at institutions of higher learning. The steps are the same that was followed by the Commission in respect of this institution and the previous institutions. I'm not going to go into that. But what I will discuss is what the Commission observed. So at these hearings, the Commission observed that there is progression in respect of gender representation in academic staff since that of 2005 to the date of the hearing. So the progression was that of 10%, so from 41 to 50%, I beg your pardon, 51%. Top and senior management positions favored women. Men dominate in the bands of professional, qualified, specialized, or mid-management and unskilled. The Commission then recommended that Nelson Mandela University explore strategies to increase women in those bands. Okay, the Commission observed that the Nelson Mandela University falls short in respect of gender parity of staff members in faculties of science, engineering, and law. In respect of this professionally qualified band, it may be raised as a red flag that more women should populate this band, given the assumption that it is the band which feeds senior and top management. Okay. The Commission also noted that PWDs were extremely underrepresented. Out of 2,451 employees, only 36 employees with disabilities were reported to the Commission to exist within the institution, with females being the lowest represented. Nelson Mandela University staffing pool was found to be not adequate in respect of representative of persons with disabilities. It is recognized, or rather it was recognized, that the Nelson Mandela University had recently absorbed in excess of 900 previously outsourced workers, which had skewed the statistics. So what had been presented to us or within the questionnaires, in response to the questionnaires, was not necessarily a true reflection, as 900 outsourced workers should have been included within the data presented to the Commission. However, strategies were required to be put in place to increase the number of persons with disabilities within its ranks. So despite that information or that disclaimer, there was still a need for strategies to be put in place, or there was still evidence that there was not enough being done, and thus strategies needed to be put in place to increase representation of that particular group. On a positive note for Nelson Mandela University is that they were commended by the university on its integrated policy framework. This framework incorporated gender transformation into its objectives, It noted that despite, as it being the commission, noted that despite holding an extensive policy framework, it was a concern that there was an inadequate flexi-time policy and childcare facilities, which then speaks to how integrated would it then have been if flexi-time policy and childcare facilities were of concern due to its inadequacy. The Commission then recommended that the university explore the development of a flexi-time work policy. The Commission also found that policies were not reviewed biannually and recommended that the university commit to having policies reviewed biannually to ensure that these policies were pragmatic and complied with changing legal landscape and needs of staff and students. It was found by the Commission that prioritization of security upgrades on all Nelson Mandela campuses were of key importance, beg your pardon, and resolved that it would monitor the implementation of the upgrades as per its integrated safety and security strategies. In respect of the follow-up hearings, this is what was presented to the Commission at these hearings. The Commission observed that there had been progress in gender representation in academic staff since 2005, which I mentioned earlier. That was the recommendation. Well, that was the observation, and then the recommendation to that was that the university has to explore strategies to increase women representation. So in respect or in response to that recommendation, the university acknowledged that it needed to do that, and it presented a table, but for the purpose of this presentation, as it's not available to you, the table showed that men constituted 58% of the occupational band at level 3, and that females constituted 42%. However, against that backdrop, 2018-2022, an integrated transformation plan, 2018-2022, the university had strategies to readdress this gender disparity that was spoken of, or that was an issue, a point of contention which needed to be remedied by recommendation in the previous hearing. And the EPP informs the recruitment and the selection of applicants and candidates, and what was required in addition was that the promotion of gender equality and diversity would be key responsibilities of all line managers, and accountability was expected at all levels as it related to the driving of implementing and monitoring the achievement of equity targets. The resignation or possible resignation of equity employees needed to be brought to the attention of the applicable HR, human resource or head of department or senior management, so that action could be taken as soon as possible to retain such employees. Exit interviews were conducted whenever there was a resignation to identify and address areas of concern that may be contributing to equity employees leaving the employer. Moreover, the university implemented the following programs to improve the representation of women, especially at senior levels and among academic employees. This included higher education women leadership development academies. This is an annual week-long interactive professional development opportunity for women employed at this institution, as well as institutions within South Africa and internationally. The aim of the program was directed at women in or aspiring to hold senior leadership positions. They also had 7 choices of successful women, which is a workshop that focused on women to realize that people who are inspired and passionate and motivated by the success of the organization could help create a passionate, thriving culture. They also had Women in Leadership, which was a 3-day short learning program, which was designed to address dynamics surrounding gender equality and then outline concepts, facts, and opinions on women in leadership in the 21st century. Financial assistance was made available. So they financially assisted 212 employees to pursue a formal qualification, of which 128, which was 60% when looking at a percentile ratio, were women. Okay. The next recommendation, the Commission observed that NMU lingers behind regarding gender parity of staff members in the faculties of, like I mentioned, science, engineering, and law. The university noted that in its drive to fulfill academic vacancies, there was no clear goal to transform the employee profile of the institution. So then the recruitment of academics was impeded by financial strains and the intense competition for talented, equity compliant academic staff within a higher education system. This is what was reported back to the Commission in respect to that recommendation. They then said to address the challenge, they had adopted the faculty resource allocation model. This was done in 2019. The aim was to ensure that the faculties were allocated enough financial resources to fill all academic vacancies. This additional injection into the academic salary amounted to approximately 50 million and had made it possible to appoint 40 new academics across all faculties over a 6-month period. Of the academic appointments, most were from underrepresented, which would be African colored, Indian racial demographics, and it contributed to the diversifying of the equity profile within academic employees. All right, let's see. The next recommendation that had to be addressed, the Commission noted that persons with disabilities were extremely underrepresented. As you remember, I mentioned the number of 2,451 employees and only 36 of those employees being persons with disabilities. In response to that recommendation, the university came back with the following. The Unit of Accessibility and Disability Services at the university was tasked with providing support and to reasonably accommodate or provide reasonable or create reasonable accommodation for students and employees with physical learning and other forms of disabilities. The unit fulfilled an important role in advising on policy development and participated rather actively in committees and forums aiming to embed disability accessibility. The Unit for Accessibility and Disability Services aimed to assist students and employees with disabilities by 1, establishing reasonable accommodations and support systems, 2, increasing awareness about and advocating for persons with disability, and lastly, increasing awareness of abilities of persons with disability among staff and students, thus providing PWDs with an equal opportunity to participate fully in aspects of the university life. Just want to make sure I haven't missed anything. From the last recommendation or point that I noted earlier in the presentation, the Commission commended the university on its integrated policy framework, which incorporated gender transformation in its objectives. In respect to that, the university, because remember they hadn't developed the flexi-time policy, the paternity leave policy, so they needed to respond to that. The university established a task team to assess the feasibility of establishing on-site childcare facilities. Various models had been analyzed. Facilities were available across all campuses of the university. The university granted employees flexibility in working hours through the COS and with prior arrangement with line managers. And the times were 7:30 to 4, 8 to 4:30, 8:30 to 5. The above hours were extended through the recent negotiations, negotiations, and they included hours of 9 to 5:30. It was cited that where possible and at the discretion of line managers, employees were able to seek approval to work from home where it was justified. As in respect of academic employees having a working week of 38.75 hours, of which only 25 hours needed to be on campus. As flexi time was codified in the leave policy, it was concluded that the university had implemented the Commission's recommendation. However, care would still need to be taken to avoid undue bias and or inconsistent approaches of line managers when it came to exercising discretion in respect of allowing employees to work from home. Yeah, so in conclusion to that, just see. Oh, before I conclude, I need to address the issues of the pregnant students. What they said. The university responded that in respect to accommodating the following groups of students for limited durations, pregnant students, pre-delivery care would will be determined or would be determined by a nursing team who would be responsible for assessing the student's readiness to deliver post-delivery care 72 hours or newborns handed over to the student's relatives or post-termination of pregnancy. In respect of post-rape, any other related GBV incidences would be within 5 days to accommodate medical results. So they would be given 5 days to accommodate medical results response to the prophylactic treatment. They also made mention of the safe haven intended to be a safe space for healing and comprehensive support. So what this meant is that they were planning to establish a safe haven, which was a secluded space away from student accommodation, where survivors of GBV violations could reside while being supported in respect of transitioning back into their normal routines, as well as usually victims. What they said was usually victims of these incidents are students who have no alternative place to relocate to in either Port Elizabeth or George, and it perpetuates. And perpetrators are oftentimes students who share the same residential space, which results in further trauma. The safe haven constituted a bold step in fighting against gender and sexual-based violence, and its intention was to accommodate the students that I mentioned earlier, the pregnant students after pre-delivery, while providing pre-delivery care as well within that structure. In conclusion, what the Commission found at the follow-up hearing was that the university needed to be applauded for its implementation of various safety measures in respect of safeguarding students and employees within those communities, within the university communities, and with several, but the university's intersectional approach to safety may be a catalyst in the decline of incidences on campus and in residence. And the Commission has monitored the progress, and it was resolved that due to the significant progress, the university would not have to be recalled. However, continuous monitoring would take place to ensure that there is transformation. That is the second institution. The third institution was the university, Salt Lake University. Just want to. What is this now? I'm so sorry, I beg your pardon. I'm just trying to get to it. know what? Let me do the University of Free State while I have that. Okay, so those universities. So Solplaatje, in respect of Solplaatje University, the commission found that women were underrepresented at top and senior management positions, and with only one woman in top management, none in senior management, and that the male domination who held these positions was at 90%, whereas the female representation was only at 10%. The same percentage was observed within the Student Representative Council. The Commission recommended to the university to increase and empower women for leadership positions. And it also elaborated that as opposed to universities carrying historical disadvantages, Solplaatje University was in a better position to start moving away from a culture of patriarchy. Apart from appointing 2 women within the executive team, and as a head of school, an equivalent, which is an equivalent to the dean at other universities, Solplaatje University undertook to increase women representation in senior management to a percentile ratio of 37.5% by February 2019. The Commission found that the university did not offer subjects to deaf and visually impaired students, that they unfairly discriminated against the deaf and visually impaired students. And although it did not register any currently, so although they had none of those students registered within the institution, the fact that they did not offer any support to students, potential students, who are deaf or virtually impaired, it meant that it would deter those students from applying to the university. Thus, the Commission then recommended that the university train lectures on sign language and offers subjects to deaf and virtually impaired students as a matter of urgency. During the hearing, it was also recommended by the Commission that the university and improve security, both on campus and within the residences. In line with the recommendations of the Commission, the university gave the assurance that it had commenced with the erection of a fence around the campus and turnstiles at building entrances. The Commission then recommended that the university complete the fencing and improve the entire campus and residence in respect of security by June of 2019. What was found was that the university did not have policies on gender, HIV/AIDS, succession, career pathing, staff retention, retirement planning. It was thus recommended by the Commission that be developed and implemented, and as well as including flexi time for breastfeeding and aftercare facilities, and that had to be done by October of 2019. What was found that within the policies that did exist, they did not refer to the provisions of international or regional instruments, the ones that I mentioned earlier. So, for example, there was no mention or reference or reliance on SADC protocol or the Convention Against Discrimination against Women. And it was recommended by the by the Commission that the university refers to these instruments in all its institutional policies when these policies were to be reviewed. Okay. Further to that, the Commission also observed that no sexual harassment policy was applicable to students, and it was recommended that one be developed for students, or to extend the scope of the application of the staff policy to include students. This was to be done by 2019-2020. It was found that there were no programs in place to support victims of GBV and discourage the possible withdrawal of cases. And it was then recommended by the Commission that the university develops programs to support victims of GBV. In respect to, in respect of the University of Mpumalanga, the findings were as follows. It was observed that the University of Mpumalanga appointed an executive director who forms part of management. As a gender transformation manager, the Commission then recommended that a senior manager be appointed for the implementation of the employment equity plan. Furthermore, to ensure that the institution is transformed against culture of patriarchy, it should implement a new generation of academic programs to recruit female lecturers. The university was also asked that it has to institute strict measures such as dialogues, workshops, or campaigns to sensitize the university community on policies such as sexual harassment, as well as disciplinary code of students and staff. The university was also told that it needed to draft the following policies: a recruitment and selection policy, employee wellness policy, and as well as a staff retention and policy, and then to redraft the whistleblower policy. Okay, already covered that. In respect of the Department of Higher Education and Training findings and recommendation, what was found was that internationalism standard need to be maintained in education. Therefore, the department had to be leaders or had to lead in the conversation of foreign influx in academia. That is, it must initiate a dialogue of African diaspora. It is a national imperative that gender mainstreaming be implemented in the Department of Higher Education and Training policies and within the department itself. The department must train its cohorts in respect of disabilities and retain women for higher positions. So outside of the universities that I mentioned or spoke of earlier, the Department of Higher Education and Training was also subpoenaed to present to the Commission, and these were the recommendations that the Commission made based on the fact that none of these existed and therefore they needed to be developed. A policy addressing gender equality also needed to be developed, and higher education, within higher education, and targets had to be set. So that did not exist. Unless I do. Okay. The Department of Higher Education and Training was also asked to identify ways to attract more fines from private sectors to the NAFSAs with at least a tax rebate as a reward. There was a need for inclusion of Africans and colored persons at academic levels. The department was also asked to set a clear target that needed to be met with regards to persons with disabilities. So that there was a need for a review of internal units as against oversight bodies in line with the transformation process, which exhibited serious challenges to these units to drive in respect of driving transformation within institutions of higher learning. There must be a minimum standard for institutions of higher learning to achieve their employment equity targets, which meant that there wasn't, and thus we have the recommendation that the Department of Higher Education and Training should also institute policies to deal with the scourge of gender-based violence within institutions of higher learning, rather than outsourcing the services to higher education HIV/AIDS program. So last few points would be that on the interventions by the Commission. The Commission has compelled universities to conduct sexual harassment campaigns during orientation. It also additionally delivered sexual harassment lectures to various universities. The Commission recommended that sexual harassment and grievance policies be shared with student representative councils and to be accessible around the university programs to all students and staff members. SRC management needed to create a safe reporting space for students. It was further recommended that refresher sessions on sexual harassment and grievance policies be conducted with both staff and students. That universities must build strong relationships with SAPs to address gender-based violence within and outside campus areas. Development and drafting of more policies in promoting gender equality needed to be seen, as well as drafting and developing policies in respect of women empowerment, promoting transformation and rights of persons with disability. Women to senior and top management levels also needed to increase. When I say increase, I mean the percentile ratio in terms of representation. Against these recommendations, some universities have invested in building more university residence to minimize the numbers of students who reside outside of campus. Some universities have also introduced CCTV footages on campus as part of their safety mechanisms. Sexual harassment policies have been extended to protect even independent contractors who enter campus, which is very important. Whistleblower lines had been established in some universities to report gender-based violence. In conclusion, the Commission observed that the Department of Higher Education released a policy framework which addressed gender-based violence in institutions of higher learning during Women's Month of this particular, not this particular financial year, but the financial year applicable to the presentation. Although the policy framework was aimed at combating GBV and challenging patriarchal practices in South Africa, it served as a guide to address all forms of GBV in the post-school education and training system. Few institutions of higher learning have improved on the recruitment of female candidates and persons with disabilities within academia, both at top and senior management positions. Even though progress is still slow and still appears to be very slow, equal representation of women and PWD is required in terms of employment equity. Thank you. That is the end of the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Matthews. And through you, Chair, again, I would request Ms. Samantha Brits to present the last transformation hearing report. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you very much, Ms. Matthews, and thank you, Chairperson. Ms. Brits may go ahead and do the presentation.
Good morning, and thank you very much for the opportunity to present. I want to say good morning also to the honourable members of the committee and commissioners and fellow colleagues from the CGE. I just want to confirm whether I'm audible.
Yes, Ms. Brits, you are audible.
Thank you. Can everybody also see my screen?
Yes, we can see it.
Thank you very much. For purposes of the presentation today, I will be focusing on procurement within the public sector and the investigations done by the legal department in the financial years 2018-19 and 19-20. For purposes of time, I'm not going to repeat what my colleagues have already alluded to in terms of our mandate and where we derive our mandate to investigate or to conduct investigative hearings. So during the 2018-19 financial year, the Commission as a constitutional body established to advance gender equality in South Africa embarked on public investigative processes focusing mainly on the procurement practices within the public sector. So this process was basically to establish a platform to assess compliance with national treasury regulations within the public sector, and further to establish the challenges experienced and measures put in place to address women's exclusion from the mainstream economy and the lack of access to economic opportunities within the public sector. The Commission then focused on 4 departments, which was the Department of Rural Development and Land Reform, Department of Health, Department of Social Development, and Department of Basic Education. The transformation hearings in terms of procurement practices focused on focused on the assessment of compliance with National Treasury guidelines within the public sector, but it was also to assess the impact of procurement processes and policies on women in the public sector, to address institutional and systemic barriers to women's economic progress, to raise awareness of relevant international commitments and the importance of compliance, to assess what measures have been put in place in the workplace to bring out transformation in terms of gender and procurement, and also to have an in-depth consultation on policy gaps. We also monitored the implementation of Commission's recommendation by each entity, which was then done through the follow-up hearings, and also then to ensure employment equity takes place within the public sector, especially amongst those that were previously disadvantaged, referring to women and people with disabilities as well. So during the public investigative process, the importance of gender sensitization of procurement staff and committees was highlighted during the hearings, as it is imperative that people understand that gender equity measures to advance women in the male-dominated areas are not to be perceived as discriminatory towards men. Therefore, policy development to address inclusivity, as well as training of supply chain management officials in government departments, was highlighted with the aim to promote and implement the provisions of the PPPFA, the BBEE, which encourages the use of women-owned enterprises to benefit from preferential procurement. I will focus on the individual departments with relation to the initial findings and recommendations, and then later also address the findings and recommendations in the follow-up hearings. So the Commission found that as opposed to international suppliers to advance the local businesses. The Commission also found that the Department of Health failed to specifically and practically apply the provisions of the PPPFA and the BBEE to expedite and reach gender equality. The department has also not awarded contracts to tenderers not scoring the highest points in efforts of advancing historically disadvantaged persons as required by the said legislation. It was therefore recommended that the department implement these provisions. Lastly, the Commission also recommended that workshops or refresher courses be conducted to train employees on the aims and the implementation of this legislation and procurement transformation. In the follow-up hearings, it was found that the department highlighted that it collaborated with various non-governmental organizations through committees and council, where gender is being mainstreamed to realize and achieve gender equality inclusive of women empowerment. The department complied with the PPPFA requirements in instances where it had to procure services from international suppliers. So this was mainly where they had to purchase or procure pharmaceuticals that is mainly manufactured internationally. However, the department stated that it continuously collaborated with the Department of Trade and Industry and National Treasury to ensure that preference is given to local manufacturers. It was indicative from the information provided and analyzed. The department was doing well in terms of procuring services from companies that are either 100% Black-owned, women-owned, and where youth and women have equity. It was highlighted during the hearing that more services will be procured in the next financial year. In terms of the Department of Social Development, the Commission recommended that the department develop a policy that require more than 30% of women in decision-making positions in line with the WEP2, notwithstanding the fact that DSD has sufficient representation of women in decision-making positions. During the subsequent follow-up hearings, the department showed improvement with respect to their workforce, as it was observed that the department had more than 30% women in leadership positions, therefore addressing the previous disadvantages. A concern was, however, that the policy in this regard was yet to be developed at the time and formed part of the recommendations by the Commission. The Commission also found that the Department of Social Development has not awarded any contracts to tenderers scoring the highest points in efforts of advancing historically disadvantaged persons, and it was recommended that DSD then implement this provision. In the follow-up hearings, it was found that DSD has partially complied with the Commission's finding and recommendations as per the previous report. However, this resulted in the department not making significant progress in prioritizing women-owned companies for awarding of contracts and tenders. The Commission recommended that DSD conduct workshops and training to employees working on procurement on the aims and the implementation of the relevant legislation and procurement transformation. DSD committed itself to provide training or refresher courses in the new financial year, which is the 2021 financial year, to all its employees working with procurement. The Commission also noted the commitment from the department to prioritize gender mainstreaming into all supply chain management processes. The Commission found that the DSD does not incorporate gender markers into ongoing reporting KPIs, and this was a red flag to the commitment of the DSD driving gender transformation. In the follow-up hearings, it was stated that DSD made a commitment to the Commission that in the coming financial year, gender-sensitive indicators will be part of the SMS members' performance agreements, inclusive of a KPI on gender mainstreaming. Department of Basic Education. The Commission found that the National Department of Education procurement profile to be concerning, with only a 3.65% being spent on companies that are owned by women and or companies where women are shareholders. It was therefore recommended that the department spend more on these companies owned by women. The DOE also failed to comply with the provisions of the PPPFA and BBEE to expedite and reach gender parity in procurement practices. It was recommended that the department then implement these provisions and revisit and implement the provisions of the PPPFA to give preference to women, youth, people with disabilities, and other previously disadvantaged persons. During the follow-up hearings, the Commission remained concerned about the low number of contracts awarded to people with disabilities. While it was encouraging to observe that a high number of contracts were awarded to Black women, in the Commission were not able to determine the total value of these bids. The Commission was unable to ascertain if contracts previously allocated to male-dominated sectors, such as construction, have been awarded to women. The DB further shared its intention to provide training for officials to be sensitized on gender issues, particularly on how women should be empowered. The last department is the Department of Rural Development and Land Reform. The Commission accepted that the supplied BBEE level contributor certificates mostly indicates ownership by gender, however, recommended that the department encourage suppliers and vendors to advance performance on gender equality. The department is found not to have an approach to responsible marketing that considers portrayal of gender stereotypes. To address this, the Commission recommended that such gender-sensitive approaches be adopted to curb the patriarchal and gender stereotypes about women and with current and potential suppliers. In the findings, the department demonstrated commitment to transform procurement practices to benefit women and youth. The department stated that it has drafted a sourcing strategy for the 2019-2020 financial year. And accordingly, The effective sourcing strategy document seeks to ensure that goods and services are delivered with the best price in the right quantities at the right time and the right place. However, it sets out targets in line with the preferential procurement regulations of 2017. The department has asserted that women are targeted for higher value contracts to achieve transformation goals. The Commission recommended the establishment of a gender equality plan as a progressive tool to ensure that women are trained at all SMS levels. The plan needs to outline how the department intends to improve the awarding of tenders to females. And it was also noted that the department's annual report does not include leadership statements on reaching gender equality goals. It was then highlighted in the follow-up hearings that the Department of Rural Development and Land Reform and the Department of Agriculture were merging, and therefore the pronouncement of gender equity statements would be made once the merging process was concluded. This will obviously also then have an impact on the gender equality plan. In conclusion, the report highlights that women are gradually making strides in male-dominated areas such as rendering services on design and construction of houses with basic services, infrastructure for evicted farm dwellers, and installation of palisade fences at schools and municipalities. The Department of Education, however, generally demonstrated slow progress in respect of advancement of women, as contracts awarded to the latter were of low monetary value as opposed to those awarded to men-owned companies, specifically in terms of construction-related work. It is nevertheless evident from the Department of Rural Development and Land Reform that it is possible for men to be awarded the most tenders, while the monetary value of the tenders awarded to women can be higher than those awarded to men. To this end, there must be an intentional commitment to ensure that procurement practices are inclusive and accommodate women, women-owned businesses, and the youth. If I can maybe just give clarity on the last statement. It was submitted by the Department of Rural Development that a total of 111 tenders were awarded, of which 28 was awarded to women-owned businesses, while 83 was then awarded to men-owned businesses. But when one looked at the total value of these contracts awarded, it was observed that the women owned businesses benefited more in terms of value of these contracts. I think it is also then important for me to just make mention that the department submitted that they recognized that there was inequality in terms of access to land by women. As such, the department then developed a land donation policy to seek to ensure that women and people with disabilities have access to land. Budget was also allocated for a campaign to ensure that women are prioritized in this regard. That is then my presentation. Thank you very much, Chairperson.
Thank you very much, Ms. Brits. And colleagues, let us really welcome the reports by Ms. Matthews as well as Ms. Seleban. Thank you for those reports. We have received the Assessing Women's Empowerment Through Houses of Traditional Leaders report in South Africa, as well as the report on gender transformation in tertiary institutions. The third report and the last one that we received from Spritz is the report on gender transformation and gender transformation on procurement. Thank you very much, Chairperson, and as well as your team for the three reports that we have received. I think what is important, colleagues, and I had raised it before, I have to a certain extent been able to pick it up through the reports, is the assessment on how far we have come since the reports were published in 2018. We appreciate that there has been a follow-up that has taken place since the reports were finalized. We can pick it up in terms of the tertiary institutions, that you have gone back to the tertiary institutions and done some extensive monitoring and evaluation on the implementation of the findings. We have also been able to pick it up on the report on the procurement from the different departments that you have been able to assess. But what is also important that we need to establish, Chairperson, is whether or not the government departments or the cabinets responsible for such have been engaged on the findings, and also how would, with regards to the challenges that have been tabled before us, how does CGE wish the committee on or the procurement or the a committee on women, youth and persons with disability, the portfolio committee, would assist in terms of ensuring that the findings or the recommendations are adhered to by all the responsible parties. Honorable members, the reports have been tabled. I will then take hands that seek to ask questions or comments on the reports that are before us. I can see the hand of Honorable Carol Piri, Honorable Sharif, Honorable Shongo, Mapoloba, Honorable Ngobo. Okay, in that order, honorable members, Honorable Piri, Honorable Sharif, Honorable Shongo, and then Honorable Ngobo.
Thanks, Chair. Let me start by greeting colleagues in the platform as well as executives and the entire delegation from the CGE, and say compliments for the new season. Chair, allow me to appreciate and welcome the report. All the three reports that has been presented to us, it gives hope and a courage to see the work that is done by the CGE. Let me say we really appreciate and we applaud a well-detailed report. You have also made your key or your address and comment after the presentation. I also want to emphasize the fact that we need to also get, the report for last year, which will be 2021 year, financial year, how far the progress, and even current year as 2022. But however, Chair, I wanted to also raise through the fact that the CGE deals with issues of gender equality. Today, seated here, yesterday we have observed a bad or a disturbing videos that were circulating in the social media at Amatole district. Even now, as we are seated, we see pictures outside the court. I want to place it in the portfolio that we are so disturbed, and through your guidance, Chair, I think it's also possible or advisable for us to also issue a statement to condemn such act, not dwelling into whatever that has happened, but the fact that a woman has been manhandled. Chair, I also want to applaud, the Zulu University in terms of the report, how progressive they've been into responding on issues or findings that were found by the CGE, the recommendation as well. Maybe we must, in all the three universities, we must be given the updated report, or how far, even through the oversight of the CGE, on all the recommendations that they've made to the 3 universities, or currently, what are they sitting on? What are other achievements? And you know, I think the presentation is very good. It looks positive in terms of what needs to be done to our higher learning institutions. And even on the side, yeah, Nelson Mandela University, I want to applaud the university in placing the pre-delivery care. We need not to overlook or undermine the fact that we've got students who becomes pregnant at school or who are married, nevertheless how it came, but we must take care of them. On that fact, I'm saying let us also make more follow-ups to check, is it practical or implementable into all institutions? Chair, I think most of the comment that you did when you were opening for us, they are very much relevant and I agree with them. And I want to say thanks to the CGE, keep it up. Let me pause there. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much, Honorable Phiri, and thank you for reminding us about the shocking incidents in Amatole District Municipality. I think as a committee, we ought to really say something about how women are treated, especially women in governance, and the due respect we should be giving to our women. That incident of a councillor that is being dragged, and we know that really her dignity as a woman has been undermined. And it's an uncalled for behavior that we really should be shunning and speaking against as a portfolio committee. Thank you for bringing that important matter up and reminding us as a committee that we ought to have said something about it. We'll then hand over to Honorable Sharif to make her contributions.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. And thank you to the CGE for your presentations and the work gone into the research and the hearings that was undertaken. I'm going to start with the report on the House of Traditional Leaders. I thought it was a very interesting study. And I, in fact, learned quite a bit from the study. I just wanted to find out, you know, when looking at one of the issues being the fact that there's a lot of interference from national government into the houses versus the lack of coordination, the lack of institutional knowledge, and the lack of internal capacity within the houses. I understand that you're saying there must be less interference from national government, but how then, or do you think once the interference or the managing of the houses gets taken away from national government, will the houses of traditional leaders be able to manage and implement the policies in order to ensure better women representation in committees and in executive positions within the excuse me, the House of Traditional Leaders? In terms of the tertiary education report, I think this was very, very important. I think a lot of the GBVF incidences we find at universities, and if I tell you the amount of young women I speak to, or when I was at university myself, the amount of sexual harassment, sexual assault that young women face at universities is really high. And a lot of them don't report what has happened to them. So have you looked at the functioning and working? I mean, it's one thing to have a crisis center, it's one thing to have the infrastructure or perhaps the staff running that facility, but it's another thing to make it a trustworthy space where young women feel safe, like a safe space to go and report what happened to them and know that something will actually happen. Oftentimes, women will report the abuser, then they have to go on Monday to the same lecture with the abuser in the class. So how do we make sure that they remain at a safe space? You know, for me, Chair, it's always about, you know how they say, innocent until proven guilty. For me, I always believe the victim until proven otherwise. So there must be something done to ensure that the victims are safe within these tertiary institutions. In terms of UniZulu, and after the policies had been adopted, has the CGE assessed these policies? Have they looked at it? And have they monitored the implementation of it from then till now? And what is the process on that? And then in terms of the transformation on procurement, I might have missed it, but I know that you did research on a study on 4 departments. What made you choose these 4 departments, and will there be a follow-up on other departments that might also be involved with procurement, so that we can ensure that there is transformation on a universal level? And on that, because we're looking at government departments, surely CGE is able to influence a universal, almost blanket cover that looks at it at government in its entirety, and not only recommendations to specific departments, but something where we can hold the executive to account, to say that it's come to cabinet, this is what you have to do in order to make gender transformation a reality within government. Thank you, Chairperson. And then just on that note, Happy New Year. I'm very glad to be back. And I'm happy that the CGE is the first entity to come and report to us. And I'm very, very, very happy with the work that has been put out by CGE. Like I said, I learned quite a bit from these studies and reports that I've learned. So I'm happy to be back. And here's to a great 2022, where we can put women's rights and equality in the main front and move. And Chair, we must do more oversights as a committee. We need to really up our game in terms of oversight and be doing oversight continuously, so that constituencies and people don't just hear about us, but they actually see us. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Honorable Sharif. Happy New Year to you too. And I couldn't agree with you more on the fact that we must really be on the ground in terms of performing our oversight role. I just want to add a bit to what you've raised in the issue of tertiary institutions, and check on the engagement of the critical and key stakeholders in the university environment or the university communities, which includes the private residences. You know that majority of the students are staying in the private communals or private residences of the university. And have we been able to extend our research looking into the safety of the girl child or young women in private residences? You know, I'm just reminded, a chairperson, of one of the cases in the Mangosuthu University of Technology, where one of the students was killed by her boyfriend in the residence environment. He was able to pass the security gates with or carrying a gun, and even enter her room and shoot her in the presence of other students and even the security of that residence. So I think it's important, as much as we engage the university, to also look into the private houses of residents and communals, because it's where also the violence against women takes place. I'll then also hand over to Honorable Hlongo to make her comments and or even ask questions. Honorable Hlongo.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. Greetings to honorable members and CGE in 2022. And I have nothing much to say, Chair. Your opening remarks basically covered a lot of things, but let me also welcome the reports and applaud the CGE for fighting for the women's rights and the inclusion of women in all sectors. I have also noted, Chair, that frequent monitoring and evaluation is being done in these institutions and departments, which is a good thing that CGE is doing. But one issue that I have, Honorable Chair, is that less is being said about women living with disabilities. CGE should look into that matter. But apart from everything, Chair, I really welcome all the reports. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable Shongo. And I think you've raised an important issue of women living with disabilities, of which we really need to hear more of such, and the responses that are being done, or the programs that are being done by the tertiary institutions and the different government department in terms of allocating procurement probably set aside specifically for women with disabilities. Mapoloba, I'll then hand over to you as our last honorable member to make contributions.
Thank you, Chairperson, and good morning, honorable members, and good morning to commissioners from CGE, as well as to the staff. Chairperson, I think that it is really concerning that we still have institutions of higher education and training that are still not meeting their employment equity target, especially as they relate to persons with disabilities. It is equally concerning that there are universities like University of Zululand, which still do not have sufficient resources to support students with disabilities. I just want to find out from the CGE if they have been able to go back to the University of Zululand and find out if they have been able to develop the visual materials or systems to support students with disabilities, which is something that they indicated they were going to do in a follow-up meeting with the CGE. And the second question is, I just want to find out from the CGE if these reports, especially the reports on transformation, on gender transformation in tertiary institutions, has been shared with the Portfolio Committee on Higher Education and the department. Thanks.
Siyabonga kakhulu ngobomkhulu for raising those pertinent matters on youth or persons with disabilities in tertiary institutions and their provisions thereof. I'll hand over to you, Chairperson, and your team to give or render the responses on the questions that have been asked by the honorable members. And whilst you are preparing to do that, I'm just giving a thought, Honorable Sharif. You know, during the period of orientation, you find a lot of students will come across problems that will need the interventions of the SRC. And I'm happy to hear that there has been a report that the sexual harassment campaigns, especially during the period of orientation, must take place, because you find a situation where some of these SRC members are preying on vulnerable young girls that are needing assistance in terms of assistance to register, or even assistance to be admitted into the tertiary institutions. There have been a lot of cases that have been reported where young girls have gone to seek for assistance from the SRCs only to be turned against by the SRC members, the very same SRC members that ought to be assisting them in finding a place, probably in a residence, or finding a place in the applications that they have, or seeking to find a space in the institution itself. So I think the monitoring of these campaigns, Chairperson of CGE, it's very important, because it's during this period where young girls are coming to tertiary institutions to seek for a higher education and advance their education. And they are vulnerable because some of them don't have residences, some of them don't have a space to study, some of them don't even have financial support. So you find that these boys from the SRC will take advantage of the vulnerability of these young women. So I think we must monitor in terms of the oversight that we ought to be playing, Honorable Sharif. That's one area that we should also be looking into. I'll hand over to you, Chairperson, and your team to give us the responses.
Sorry, Chair, if I just have one question, please.
Yes, Honorable Sharif.
Thank you. Chair, Honorable Ngobo did bring it up, but I just wanted to find out maybe a little bit deeper. Has the CGE done any investigation or study research into the amount of universities or higher education institutions that cater for people with disabilities such as hearing or visual impairments? Because it's very difficult to say you can only go to this university or this university because this university doesn't have it. So is there a list of or some sort of mechanism where we're able to see how many of these universities are catered for persons with disabilities?
Thank you, Honorable Sharif. It's quite an important question that you are raising. Chairperson, I will then hand over to you.
Thank you very much, Chairperson, and I must also thank honorable members of the committee for the questions asked. And I cannot agree with you more, Honorable Sharif and Chairperson, in terms of looking at, intensifying these monitoring campaigns during induction weeks at universities. And also, I think HAIDS as well has actually weighed in with the new guidelines that are looking at addressing issues of sexual and gender-based violence, as well as femicide in institutions of higher learning. So I fully agree with your sentiments, Chair. I would allow the researcher as well as our legal team to actually respond to the questions related to these reports. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chairperson. I will respond to questions raised by members directly about the report. I also see that some of the questions are broad to the institution, and I will leave those to yourself, Chairperson, and the commissioners to help us in that regard. I'll respond to the question of interference. I think it's an interesting question, especially because legislation in terms of the nation of the houses of traditional leaders is quite clear that government departments should provide this important support that has to deal with administrative, technical, and financial support. And I would say, in response to the question raised by the member, that perhaps it would be important that as the department as well as the House of Traditional Leaders engage with our recommendations, look at the institutional design of these houses and why there's so much encroachment, why the lines seem to be blurred. I think that would yield proper results. It will help in assisting that the two do not, or rather that the departments do not are not seen as though they are taking over the mandate. Because in terms of interference, what we noted was that the departments would literally take over the functions on operations. And they would, for example, determine what programs need to be taken forward. And many a times when these programs were not taken forward, or programs of the houses were not taken forward, it was because the department would not be offering support. So there seems to be sort of, I'd say, for lack of a better word, lack of cooperation between the two institutions, and there needs to be harmonization between the two. But I believe that a key starting point would be looking at what are the powers and functions given to COCTA in nationally, as well as in the departments, as well as what are the powers and functions of these houses, and how can the two work together in order for the provincial houses as well as the national house to be able to execute its function. So I think there's a need to review and look at the institutional makeup or design of these two. I think that is the one question that I picked up specifically to the report. And with issues of women with disabilities, that's an important aspect. And I think our limitations even go beyond that, in terms of, for example, looking at if maybe there are lesbian women, for example, or gay men who would, feel discriminated against if they also, are in line to inherit the throne. And I would say this is important for us as the CGE going forward, as we carry out these studies to also look at these important aspects, and we take that on board. Thank you, Chairperson. My connection is quite unstable. If there's anything I missed, I'm sure that my colleague Deketeng will assist.
Good morning. I think, Naledi, you have covered most of the questions that were asked related to the report. Thank you.
Chairperson, thank you through you. There's questions that were asked about the Honorable Ngobo asked the question of UniZulu and whether that they have dealt with the virtual access. Thank you, Honorable Ngobo, for that, and whether the report was shared with Department of Higher Education. Honorable Ngobo, I cannot decisively answer on the access for people with disabilities. I think it's connected to Honorable Sheriff. In the annual performance plan, we do have the follow-up on the performance. I think Mamelo did indicate the performance thus far and the follow-up recommendations. In terms of what's happened now with the virtual in 2020, I think it's in line with both yourself, Honorable Sharif and Honorable Piri, who said, can we appraise you on the current year, which is what we do in the last quarter and the last submission that we then do in the post-mortem of the hearings. I'm not sure if maybe I can get a sense from Chair, is there a report that will focus on the UniZulu for the updated ones, because we do what we call a sample of the universities because of the number of universities in the country. But I do believe we can follow up because these are universities that have already been conducted analysis in this regard. So it's simply for us to ascertain if they haven't provided sufficient information on this. We specifically point it out to them and get the updated response from the UniZulu. I think we can commit to that, Honorable Piri and Honorable Ngobo, to ascertain if the virtual access has been committed to in the last financial year or as in this financial year, and also how do we measure that? The second question was the report on higher education. Was it shared with the Department of Higher Education and Training? That one, we can definitely say it has happened. There was a portfolio committee meeting. CEO presented some of the findings of the outcomes of the CGE in terms of the conclusive report. But what I do want to share with the committee is that we had a meeting to say, how do we further generically some of the findings as an institution? And we set up a task team. We looked at, there were about 30 institutions we've looked at, 4 of them being TVET colleges. We added another 4, so 8 TVET colleges. All of these are under the custodian of the Department of Higher Education and Training. And we looked at the performance of various indicators as the researchers and the legal team have pointed out. And the findings that we have found are consistent. And we said, let's present these to the shareholder. Let's engage with the shareholder to see exactly what can be done. The CEO, unfortunately, cannot be here to share some of the findings, but I do know there was a team that engaged on with the Department of Higher Education on some of the report findings. Thank you, members.
Thank you, Deputy Chair, and of the sharing of the Higher Education Portfolio Committee. I must also add that we also shared our report on transformation in public as well as private with the portfolio committee meetings. Unfortunately, I don't have the dates with me, but it was during the last financial year. Portfolio committees, these 2 reports in higher education as well as transformation in the public and private sector. Thank you, Chair. I would request that my colleagues who presented respond to Honorable Songo as well as Honorable.
Chairperson, your network coverage is not so good. As a result, you are not audible. Can you try and find a good space so that we can be able to hear you?
Okay, Chair, how is it now? Am I audible, Chair?
Yes, you are audible, Chairperson.
Okay, thank you very much, Chairperson. Yes, indicating that the Deputy Chair is correct. In the last financial year, we did share the report on transformation in institutions of higher learning with the Portfolio Committee. We also shared the findings as well as recommendations of our report that looks at gender transformation in the public and private sector with the Portfolio Committee on Employment and Labor. So we did share those findings. We shared the recommendations with the Portfolio Committee Chair. I was actually trying to look for dates, where we actually share those two reports with two portfolio committees. Thank you, Chair. And I was requesting that our colleagues who made presentations should please respond to Honorable Sharif's questions, follow-ups at university, any mechanisms, and whether CGE is doing any further research on institutions of higher learning to look at visually impairment and addressing those issues. Thank you, Chair. And over to my colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. And I think before the commissioners come in, it's very important and it's quite a concern that Deputy Chair, we are hearing that some of the findings are not known because the CEO is not in the meeting. The question that one has is what the commissioners are doing to champion, some of these, the findings or the outcomes in their respective provinces where these higher education institutions are located. So one would like to hear from the commissioners when they are responding, what their specific roles are in relation to championing or monitoring some of these findings that have been presented in this platform.
It's Mandela from the legal team responding in respect to the questions related to the presentation on the higher institution, the tertiary institutions. With regards to, so there were two questions that were asked. I'm not sure if Honorable Sharif's question was a question or a statement, but I'll get to that. So I'll just answer the ones that I'm sure are questions for now. In respect of whether the CGE has engaged with the universities subsequent to the follow-up hearings, I can confirm that that has happened. It would not have been in the same setting in terms of a follow-up hearing, but in terms of communication, formal letters have gone out to ask the various institutions whether they've made good on the recommendations that they have undertaken to do. And many of the universities responded with the challenges being that of a budgetary nature, and therefore those constraints causing issues in implementing all recommendations or undertakings that they had made. However, what was positive was that in respect of assignment of EEE managers to realize transformation, that had been taken seriously by institutions and thus had been implemented to the best of their ability. They did well in terms of adopting policies such as sexual harassment policies. Sexual harassment policies are of great concern to the Commission for Gender Equality, and the taking of it in a serious nature by institutions is very, very important to us. And when any institution, whether it's a tertiary institution or a private entity within the private sector, really commits to fostering and implementing a progressive and robust sexual harassment policy, it really makes us really happy and relieved that particular issue is of importance to such institutions. In respect of poor representation of women within leadership levels, advancing previous groups in senior academic positions also remains to be a challenge and continues to be a challenge. And those are one of the issues that falls under the budgetary constraints. If there's a budgetary constraint, then obviously it is difficult to employ more staff, and specifically then to bring on more female representation. Have we been able to go back to the University of Zululand? I can confirm that we would have been able to go back in respect of the writing letters. However, I cannot confirm what the outcome or what the response had been. I would need to check and clarify in that response. But the process at this point would be sending out written communications, listing the undertakings, and then requesting evidence on whether these undertakings had been made good of. If you could please remind me, Honorable Sharif, in respect of your question or statement around the trustworthy space, I think it referred to the environments or the space that had been created for victims of gender-based violence when it came to transitioning back into their lives. If I remember correctly, you said that how do we know if it's working in respect of is it really a safe and trustworthy space? Could you please remind me if that was a question or a statement?
Yes, it was a question. It was a question looking at specific safe spaces that universities create. Are they a safe space? Do young women feel safe going there and reporting the abuse, or is it just a tick box exercise sort of thing, Ms. Matthews?
That's a really good question. And unfortunately, it's not a question I would have an answer to because the CGE would then need to engage with the young women and men who may have used these facilities in respect to what the experience was. Because as you'd understand, the university would obviously portray that it is a system that is working, but there are two sides to the coin, and we would need to hear from the other side of the coin whether that is indeed the case. And what I can say is that I can take it back to our department and ask whether we have done some form of measurement as to whether it is a successful program that they've implemented in respect of whether the participants and users of the space do feel that it has been beneficial to them in respect of support and creating an environment of safety. I think I've answered all the questions. Thank you.
Good afternoon, honorable members. It's Ms. Britt speaking with regards to the questions that was raised in terms of the procurement presentation. So the first question was, why did the CGE then select the departments mentioned? And then if there will be other departments selected, and if there will be follow-up hearings for them as well. So I can confirm that there will be indeed continuous investigative hearings by the legal department. Therefore, there will be new selection of departments and follow-up hearings for those departments following the initial investigative hearing process, just to track compliance or progress rather with the recommendations by the Commission. Then in terms of the selection of the departments as per the presentation, at the time, in the 2018-19 financial year, general health and land were part of the thematic areas that the CGE was focusing on. The Department of Education was then selected due to complaints that was received by the Commission. And in terms of the Department of Social Development, it was to basically assess to what extent the department is supporting Department of Health in terms of psychosocial practices. So that was what led to the selection of the 4 departments. Then in terms of procurement, where people with disabilities may benefit, and I think also earlier comment or question rather by the Honourable Committee, I'm not sure who actually asked the question, but the question related to what can be done from the committee side or then in general to ensure compliance and better progress with gender transformation in terms of procurement. So I think the first step is basically the issuance of directives to accounting officers and including gender transformation in the KPIs of these accounting officers, which I think will bring about, accountability. And then this can then also address the procurement of contracts to people with disabilities. So basically, it all boils down to concerted efforts by all the role players, directives being issued, and then where CGE then monitor, compliance with these directives and KPIs. And then obviously consequences should follow where there's failure to adhere. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. With your permission, I will request that Commissioner Rakolote responds on behalf of commissioners on the question about the role of commissioners in executing their monitoring and oversight role.
Thank you so much, Chairperson, and good afternoon, honorable members and colleagues from CGE. In terms of our role as commissioners, we are an oversight board in the CGE, and what we do, we continuously invite this institution for investigative hearing as a form of follow-up on the findings of this research report. So continuously, we have this investigative hearing as a form of a follow-up to the research findings and to monitor whether they are implementing our recommendations. Thank you so much, Chairperson.
Thank you, Commissioner Rakolote. Over to you, Chairperson.
Thank you, Chairperson, and thank you to the commissioners and the team that has given responses. I just feel, Chairperson, that the response by Commissioner Rakalota is a bit general. Can he be specific in relation to the recommendations that we have received from the 3 reports? What are the specific roles of the commissioners in oversight, monitoring these findings that have been reported in today's meeting?
Thank you, Chairperson. We will attempt to respond to these questions, Chair. However, I think Commissioner Rakolote was quite on the spot in terms of saying that as commissioners collective, we always make sure that it is our duty that we subpoena, and state-owned institutions to come and really report and appear before commissioners. So usually this is we regard this as a commissioner program, Chairperson. So I will start, Chair, and attempt to respond with regards to the oversight and monitoring role in terms of the uptake of these recommendations.
Chair, you are not audible.
Chairperson, you will remember that I'm roving in all 9 provinces, so I won't actually be specific, but I also want to open. Okay, Chair, can I hand over to some? Am I audible now, Chair?
You are a bit audible, Chairperson, but we are still struggling to hear you. Maybe we could request the Deputy Chairperson to assist.
Okay, thanks, Honorable Masiko. Thanks, Chairperson, and honorable members again. I think I hope I articulate clearly what Chairperson was trying to articulate. There is a question on what exactly is the specific oversight role that Commissioner Rapolote has proposed or has stated that we are fulfilling. Chairperson was then trying to state that the work of the investigative hearings is primarily the work of or commissioner-led. Why she's saying that is that because we then call the universities and ensure that the process of the hearings with the support of the legal unit takes place and is underway. What transpires usually in those hearings, colleagues and honorable members, is that the process that takes place is you usually have 4 to 5 commissioners. What they then do is based on what we call primary analysis that is done based on the initial submissions of the universities. We analyze those submissions. We get a sense of where are the gaps in the submissions of the universities, and those relate to the first being the number of academics in terms of senior, junior, and mid-management. We also look at the equity plan of the institution. We then look at the transformative nature of equality in the institution. We also look at the issue of safety on the campus, but this has to be done from the initial submissions that are done. Commissioners then have to, when they engage the university, which usually produces and submits senior management executives and or the chancellor, vice chancellor, who then sit in the hearings to actually respond to the questions. That is the direct hearing that commissioners then undertake with the full support of the legal teams that would have assisted us. The second one, Chairperson Masiko, that the commissioners are involved in post the submission of the inputs from the university, there would then be recommendations that are then collated and put together based on the engagement. That also is based on the investigative hearing where the particular drive comes from the commission. I think the third point, the plethora of universities, which is, I think, what is critical, and all the members of the portfolio committee have raised the issue of what have you done once you have done this? And the number of universities and the number of institutions that we have tried to strengthen and go and follow up. We do what we call follow up on these institutions. Some are in the form of what Samantha has already stated, which is the preliminary letters that are written as a result of the findings and the recommendations to the respective institution. Once you've analyzed, once you've done the hearing and you've produced a report, you then have to follow that up. So in the financial years, we then call them back to account as a post-hearing type of an intervention. And then that institution has a sense of a follow-up in terms of the recommendations. The reports that were submitted, I do know that the presenters did try to share with the members the follow-up on the progressiveness in terms of how far. And I think maybe we can improve. I've heard the members say that how far on some of the issues, maybe we can improve by detailing further some of the issues that you wanted to interrogate, and we provide substantive responses, Chair. I hope I assisted. I do see my colleague, Commissioner Sibanya Mokhale, may want to supplement.
Thank you very much, Deputy Chairperson. I think you have been able to assist us with the responses, especially the one that the role that covers the role of the commissioners in the respective provinces, especially those that have the higher education institutions. We must also appreciate, Deputy Chairperson, I heard you make mention of the TVET colleges. You know, usually when we are speaking about the tertiary institutions, we normally cover the universities of higher learning, and we forget about the TVET colleges. And that is also where most of our learners and the girl children are. Those spaces that they are participating in TVET colleges, they experience the same challenges that the students in universities of higher learnings they are facing. So we appreciate that you still have your eyes and your ears on the ground in relation to the spaces of TVET colleges. We'll hand over to Commissioner Mokhale to make her contributions.
Thank you very much, Chair. My response was going to be in relation to the work that we are doing as commissioners with traditional leadership. In the Free State, for the past 2 years, we have actually engaged traditional leaders on a number of issues, mainly gender mainstreaming, what it is, how they could bring on board gender equality within their structures and push it within their communities. As a result, we met with the Free State chiefs themselves. And then afterwards, we met with Mafuma Hadi, who are the women, who are the wives of the chiefs. And fortunately, in the Free State, they are very organized. We met with them, we took them through some of the issues that relate to gender equality and what role they can play. And then we also met with the head men, if I could use that word loosely, the council members in the traditional leadership structures, and took them through training on gender equality and a bit on gender-based violence. To follow that up, one of the issues that they had raised was the structures that have fallen apart in their communities, especially with regards to safety. And we then, as a follow-up, met with the leadership of SAPS in the Free State province and raised the issue of CPFs that they were saying, they're requesting that those be revived. Where they were not there, those be established. And this is just one of the many things that we have so far followed up. And then in the Northwest, we have also initiated a similar program. We have met with the executive of the House of Traditional Leadership in the Northwest. After we met with them and took them through issues of customary law, customary marriages, and gender-based violence, they then invited their executive and the broader body. They invited all the other chiefs. We met with the chiefs 29th and 30th of September last year, and it was quite a successful meeting that we had with them, where we trained them. And then now we're just waiting for the year to start now, so that we can be called into the different villages. But the chief traditional leadership body has actually resolved that we are now going a step lower, but a step deeper into the communities to teach them about mainly three things: gender equality broadly, gender-based violence, but above all, the challenges that they have with regards to recognition of customary marriages. So far, we have actually developed a tool on recognition of customary marriages and actually presented it to them and workshopped them on the tool. And it is ready and to be implemented and has been approved by them. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Mohale. And I think, colleagues, we've been able to get all the answers to the questions which have been answered. I see the hand of Commissioner Nomasonto. I will hand over to you, Commissioner Nomasonto.
Thank you, Chairperson. I would like to answer a question or a comment of disability. I think that question was overlooked, but when we were presenting in the higher education, disability is homogeneous, and usually there are the universal structure where there are ramps and everything. But in all higher education, universities and TVET colleges, there is a disability desk where we work with the disability organizations. But as it's stressed in our report that the visually impaired and the deaf learners, specifically the women, have been overlooked. But I can report to this platform that the universities, specifically Limpopo, KZ University, UniZul, and the Free State are universities or higher education schools that we can benchmark and say they have good practices. And as we're going back to school, the organizations of persons with disabilities, they themselves will assist or do assist. So as the Gender Commission, we work very closely with those organizations where we assist learners with disability to say there is a gender desk, there is a disability desk in each and every higher education institution. So I think as CGE, we have looked into those situations where specifically in UniZul, we did say that we need sign language interpreters, and in TUT, we do have the assistance of visually impaired learners. So I think as CGE, it is one of our priorities to look at the females and the students to be assisted in the institution of higher learning. I think that is very important, as we know that coming from COVID, many learners have now decided that they are going to be looked and get further education from home. But we do encourage our disabled learners to go back to on campus so that they do even socialize. But what I want to stress on this platform this afternoon is that there is a disability of mental, where we have to work very hard as CGE and as a country of the mental disability, where people are very afraid to disclose. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Nomasonto. I will then hand over to the chairperson to just do her closing remarks so that we can close the section off and proceed to the next item on our agenda. I'll hand over to you, chairperson, if you are having any, closing remarks on behalf of CGE so that we can proceed to the next item.
Thank you, Chairperson. I hope I'm audible, Chair.
Yes, you are audible, Chairperson.
Am I audible, Chair?
Yes, Chair, you are audible.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be very brief. Chairperson, I just want to thank members of the Portfolio Committee, yourself as the Chair. Oh, thank you, Chair. Chair, I just want to sincerely appreciate
Okay, Chair, I think we've lost you once again. I will just hand over then to
members of the Portfolio Committee, yourself, Chair, my colleagues, commissioners as well as the staff from CGE. Thank you very much for giving us this opportunity to come and present the 3 reports. I know that we have a bigger role in Hello, Chair.
Yes, Chair, we can hear you.
Chair, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. We lost you there, that you know that you have a bigger role. Yes, we can hear you, Chair.
Chair, can I help you just to thank the committee members? I don't know what's happening with your network so that we don't stretch the meeting and delay the members. If you will allow me, Honorable Chair. Thank you. I think Chairperson's experiencing challenges with the network. I just wanted to say thank you very much to the committee members for their time. Thank you to the honorable members. We will commit to, if there's any follow-up, please, Honorable Chair, let us know if any of the questions require follow-up, and then we will provide the necessary responses. Also, thank you to the staff that is here. Thank you very much to the researchers and the legal staff that are supporting us in today's session, to Naledi, Diegetseng, to Samantha and Mamelo. And also thank you, honorable commissioners, sorry, not honorable, but commissioners for the support. I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Deputy Chairperson, and let us, on behalf of the Portfolio Committee, appreciate all the commissioners that are present in today's meeting, together with your officials that have rendered the presentations on behalf of the Commission. We greatly appreciate the work that has been done, especially by the commissioners themselves in the provinces, as well as the CGE staff. We know that your presence in the provinces is felt by the ordinary women on the ground, and we appreciate the work that has been done. There are a number of reports that remain outstanding, commissioners, and as the year progresses or the term progresses, we will be finding space as the Portfolio Committee to give time to CGE to come and present the report to us as a Portfolio Committee. We have then concluded the item that needed the CGE to be present in this meeting. We greatly appreciate you guys, and we request that you have a great afternoon, and we request that you leave the meeting. Honorable members, we still have one item which is remaining in this agenda that we're having today that will need us to not leave the meeting. Thank you very much, commissioners. You may leave. Thank you, CGE officials. You may also leave the meeting, but we request the honorable members to remain behind for the one item that we need to deal with.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Neliswa, please may you flight the minutes. Okay, thank you, Nelly. So, honorable members, before us are the draft minutes of the virtual meeting of the Portfolio Committee on Women, Youth and Persons with Disabilities, which was held on Tuesday, the 7th of December, 2021. I think that this was one of our last meetings in December. In this specific meeting, we had received a briefing by the Department of Women, Youth and Persons with Disabilities as well as the Department of Police and the Department of Justice and Correctional Services. These departments were giving us progress with regards to the implementation of the National Strategic Plan on Gender-Based Violence and Femicide. I'm sure honorable members are aware of that meeting. We had also within the meeting, honorable members invited the Portfolio Committee on Justice and Correctional Services, as well as the Portfolio Committee on Police, which were present. I remember that we had invited as well the Department of Home Affairs. They had sent an apology, citing that they were not able to join the meeting. The minutes are before us, and honorable members, they were circulated to us before the meeting. I think we should take them as read. I will then request a hand that will move for the adoption of these minutes that are before us. Thank you, Honorable Masondo.
Thank you, Chairperson. I propose that we adopt the minutes as true reflections that transpired from the last meeting.
Thank you very much, Honorable Masondo. Honorable members, Honorable Masondo has moved for the adoption of the minutes that are screened by Uneliswa. I will request a hand that will support or second the mover of the minutes. Neliswa, can you just go back to the page where we see the members who were present in the meeting? Honorable Piri, Honorable Masondo, Honorable Piti, Honorable Sharif, Honorable Ngobo, Honorable Shangwini, and Honorable Hlengwa. Can between the six of the honorable members, can we have an honorable member who's going to second? Honorable Piri?
Thank you, Chair. I second the minutes as being presented. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Honorable Piri, for seconding. The minutes have been duly adopted by the Portfolio Committee. Thank you very much. Honorable members, it is our last item on today's agenda, and we've exhausted all the items that we are having before us. I will request that we end this meeting by thanking the honorable members for making the time to attend the meeting and participate productively. And thank you very much. The meeting is officially closed. We'll see you in the next...
Sorry, Chair. Sorry,
yes,
Chair.
Honorable.
There was the draft first term committee program. I don't know, or maybe what did I get it? If you can find
is it on our agenda?
No, Chair, it's not on the other agenda.
It's not, okay. All right, it's not on the agenda, Honorable Masondo.
Okay, Chair.
I think we'll probably deal with it in the next meetings as the weeks progress. But honorable members, thank you very much for your attendance, and may you have a great afternoon. Thank you and good